Arya Blackthorne had always known that her life would be governed by magic, prophecy, and the kind of dramatic destiny that most people only encountered in fairy tales. As the youngest daughter of the Blackthorne family, one of the oldest magical bloodlines in the kingdom of Eldermere, Arya had grown up surrounded by ancient spells, mystical artifacts, and the constant awareness that her future would be shaped by forces far beyond her personal preferences or romantic inclinations. But nothing had prepared her for the morning of her 20th birthday when she woke up to find a glowing golden mark on her left wrist that pulsed with magical energy and spelled out a message in flowing script that appeared to be written in starlight, bound by fate to Prince Alexander of Eldermere, to be wed within one turning of the seasons, lest both bloodlines face eternal darkness. Arya stared at the mark in horror, her mind racing through the implications of what appeared to be a binding magical contract that she had never agreed to and certainly didn't want to honor. Prince Alexander was known throughout the kingdom as a handsome and capable heir to the throne, but he was also rumored to be arrogant, politically calculating, and completely uninterested in anything beyond his royal duties and strategic marriages that would strengthen the crown's power. "Mother," Arya called out as she rushed downstairs to find Lady Evangeline Blackthorne in the family's expansive library, surrounded by ancient texts and magical artifacts that might provide answers about the mysterious curse that had apparently bound Arya to the crown prince overnight. Lady Evangeline looked up from the dusty tome she had been consulting, her expression mixing maternal concern with the kind of scholarly fascination that always emerged when she encountered new magical phenomena. "I felt the magic activating during the night," she said, gesturing for Arya to approach so she could examine the glowing mark more closely. "Show me exactly what appeared." Arya held out her wrist, watching her mother's face carefully for any sign of recognition or understanding of the magical binding that had apparently been placed upon her without warning or consent. The mark pulsed brighter as Lady Evangeline traced its outline with her finger, her touch causing the script to shimmer and reveal additional text that had been hidden beneath the surface. "This is a convergence binding," Lady Evangeline said finally, her voice carrying the weight of centuries-old magical knowledge. "It's one of the most powerful and ancient forms of magical contract, designed to unite bloodlines that possess complementary magical abilities during times of great threat to the kingdom." Arya felt her stomach drop as she processed the implications of her mother's explanation. "You mean this isn't just some random curse? This is some kind of official magical arrangement that I'm legally and magically bound to honor?" Lady Evangeline nodded gravely, though her expression also conveyed sympathy for her daughter's predicament. "Convergence bindings are only activated when the kingdom faces existential threats that can only be overcome through the combined magical power of specific bloodlines. The Blackthorne family has been bound to the royal line for over 1,000 years, but the binding has only been activated 3 times in our recorded history." Arya sank into one of the library's leather chairs, trying to process the reality that her entire future had been determined by ancient magical contracts and royal bloodline politics rather than her own choices about love, marriage, and life direction. "What kind of existential threat are we talking about?" Arya asked, hoping that understanding the magical and political context might help her find a way to navigate her unwanted engagement to Prince Alexander. Lady Evangeline returned to her consultation of the ancient texts, searching for historical precedents that might provide guidance about the current situation. "The last time a convergence binding was activated was during the Shadow Wars 2 centuries ago, when dark magic threatened to consume the entire kingdom. The union of our ancestor Lydia Blackthorne with King Marcus the Bold created a magical alliance that saved the realm from destruction." Arya felt somewhat comforted by the knowledge that her family's magical binding to the royal line had historically served important protective purposes, but she was still struggling with the personal implications of being magically contracted to marry someone she had never met and knew nothing about beyond his public reputation. "What do you know about Prince Alexander personally?" Arya asked her mother, hoping to gather information that would help her understand what kind of person she was apparently destined to spend her life with. Lady Evangeline's expression became more thoughtful and less certain. "I know very little about his personality or character beyond the official royal presentations. He's 22 years old, well-educated in both magical theory and statecraft, and has a reputation for being serious and dedicated to his royal duties. But I've never had occasion to observe him in casual or personal contexts." Arya felt frustrated by the lack of information about her magical fiancé, but also curious about what Prince Alexander's reaction would be to discovering that he had been bound by the same convergence curse that had appeared on her wrist overnight. "Do you think he knows about the binding yet?" Arya asked, wondering whether Prince Alexander was currently experiencing the same shock and confusion that had marked her own morning. Before Lady Evangeline could respond, a formal knock echoed through the Blackthorne manor, followed by the announcement that a royal messenger had arrived with an urgent communication from the palace. Arya felt her heart racing as she realized that Prince Alexander had indeed discovered the magical binding, and was apparently taking immediate action to address their shared predicament. The royal messenger was a young man in elaborate court dress, who presented Arya with a sealed letter bearing the prince's personal crest and magical signature. His message was brief but courteous, requesting her presence at the palace that afternoon for a private meeting to discuss their shared magical circumstances and the arrangements that would need to be made to honor their binding contract. Well, Lady Evangeline observed as Arya finished reading the prince's message, it appears that Prince Alexander is approaching this situation with appropriate seriousness and consideration for your perspective. That's a promising sign for your future relationship. Arya felt nervous about meeting Prince Alexander for the first time under such unusual and consequential circumstances, but she was also curious about what kind of person he would prove to be, and whether they might be able to find common ground despite the artificial nature of their magical engagement. I suppose I should prepare for my first meeting with my cursed fiancé, Arya said, trying to inject some humor into her overwhelming situation. Any advice for making a good impression on someone you're magically bound to marry whether you like each other or not? Lady Evangeline smiled at her daughter's attempt to find levity in their serious situation. Be yourself, ask thoughtful questions, and remember that he's probably just as overwhelmed and uncertain about this binding as you are. Arranged marriages can become genuine partnerships when both people approach them with openness and good faith. As Arya prepared for her afternoon meeting with Prince Alexander, she tried to balance her anxiety about the magical binding with curiosity about the man who had become her destined partner through forces neither of them had controlled. She had no way of knowing that her first encounter with the Crown Prince would challenge all of her assumptions about royal duty, magical destiny, and the possibility of finding real love within the constraints of mystical obligation. Chapter 2: The Unexpected Prince. Arya arrived at the royal palace of Eldermere that afternoon, dressed in her finest formal attire, a deep emerald gown that complemented her dark hair and highlighted the golden glow of the convergence mark on her wrist. She had expected to be led to a formal throne room or official reception hall for her meeting with Prince Alexander, but instead she was escorted to a comfortable sitting room, decorated with books, art, and the kind of personal touches that suggested this was the prince's private study rather than a ceremonial space. Prince Alexander rose from his desk when Arya entered the room, and she was immediately struck by how different he appeared from the formal royal portraits she had seen throughout her life. He was indeed handsome, with dark hair and intelligent green eyes, but there was a warmth and approachability in his expression that contradicted his reputation for cold political calculation. "Lady Arya," Prince Alexander said, offering her a respectful bow that seemed genuine rather than perfunctory. "Thank you for coming to meet with me so quickly. I know this situation is overwhelming and unexpected for both of us." Arya felt somewhat relieved by the prince's considerate tone, and his acknowledgement that their magical binding was just as disruptive to his life as it was to hers. "Your Highness," she replied with a curtsy, "I appreciate your invitation to discuss our circumstances directly rather than leaving everything to be arranged by our families and the royal court." Prince Alexander gestured for Arya to sit in one of the comfortable chairs near his desk, then settled across from her in a posture that was relaxed and attentive rather than formal and distant. "Please, call me Alexander," he said with a smile that seemed both nervous and genuine. "Given that we're apparently destined to spend our lives together, I think we can dispense with excessive formality, at least in private." Arya felt touched by Alexander's attempt to create a more personal atmosphere for their conversation. "In that case, please call me Arya. I've never been comfortable with excessive titles and ceremonial address." Alexander's smile widened at her response. "I'm relieved to hear that. I was worried that you might prefer to maintain royal protocol even in our personal interactions." They spent the first part of their meeting comparing their experiences of discovering the convergence binding, sharing their initial shock and confusion about the magical contract that had apparently been activated without their knowledge or consent. "I woke up this morning to find this glowing mark on my wrist," Alexander said, showing Arya a marking identical to her own that pulsed with the same golden light. "My first thought was that someone had played an elaborate magical prank on me, but my advisors confirmed that this is a legitimate and binding magical contract." Arya examined Alexander's mark with interest, noting that the script was slightly different from her own, but conveyed the same essential message about their destined union and the consequences of failing to honor the binding. "My mother explained that convergence bindings are only activated during times of existential threat to the kingdom," Arya said, watching Alexander's face for his reaction to this information. "Do you know what kind of danger we're apparently meant to face together?" Alexander's expression became more serious as he consulted a collection of documents and reports that were spread across his desk. "My magical advisors believe that the binding was triggered by signs of dark magic gathering strength in the neighboring kingdom of Shadowmere. There are reports of ancient evils awakening and dark sorcerers attempting to breach the protective barriers that have kept our realm safe for centuries." Arya felt a chill at this explanation, recognizing that their magical binding was indeed connected to serious threats that would require the combined power of their bloodlines to overcome. "So we're not just being forced into marriage for political convenience," Arya observed. "We're being magically contracted to create a partnership that might be necessary to save the kingdom from supernatural destruction." Alexander nodded gravely. "Exactly.
which means that regardless of our personal feelings about arranged marriage or magical contracts, we have a responsibility to make this partnership work effectively. Arya appreciated Alexander's mature and realistic approach to their situation, but she was also curious about his personal feelings about their binding and the prospect of building a life together with someone he had just met. "How do you feel about being magically bound to marry someone you don't know?" Arya asked directly, hoping to understand Alexander's emotional response to their shared predicament. Alexander considered her question thoughtfully before responding. "Honestly, I'm nervous about the personal aspects of our situation, but I'm also curious about you as a person and optimistic about the possibility that we might actually be compatible despite the artificial nature of our engagement." Arya felt encouraged by Alexander's honest and positive perspective on their relationship potential. "I feel similarly nervous and curious. I was expecting to have more control over my romantic future, but I'm open to the possibility that our magical binding might lead to something genuine and meaningful." Alexander's expression brightened at Arya's response. "In that case, I have a proposal that might help us navigate our situation more effectively." Arya leaned forward with interest, curious about what Alexander had in mind for managing their unusual engagement and the expectations that came with their magical contract. "Instead of rushing into a wedding ceremony just to fulfill the letter of our magical binding," Alexander continued, "what if we took some time to actually get to know each other and see whether we can build a real relationship that would make our marriage meaningful rather than just magically necessary?" Arya felt intrigued by this suggestion, recognizing that it offered an opportunity to approach their relationship with intentionality rather than simply accepting their fate passively. "What would that look like in practical terms?" Arya asked, wanting to understand Alexander's vision for their courtship and relationship development. Alexander's enthusiasm for his idea was becoming more apparent as he explained his thoughts. "We could spend the next few months going on actual dates, having real conversations about our interests and goals, and learning about each other's personalities and compatibility. Essentially, we could court each other properly despite the fact that we're already engaged through magical contract." Arya found this approach both romantic and practical, offering them the opportunity to build genuine affection and understanding that would support their marriage, regardless of the magical obligations that had brought them together. "I love that idea," Arya said with genuine enthusiasm. "It would give us the chance to see whether we actually like each other and want to build a life together, rather than just going through the motions of a magical marriage contract." Alexander looked relieved and pleased by Arya's positive response to his courtship proposal. "Excellent. In that case, would you be interested in having dinner with me tomorrow evening? Not as a formal royal engagement, but as our first actual date?" Arya felt excitement mixing with nervousness at the prospect of going on a real date with Alexander, but she was also charmed by his desire to court her properly despite their unusual circumstances. "I would love to have dinner with you tomorrow," Arya replied with a smile that felt natural and genuine rather than politely formal. "Should I prepare for a typical royal dining experience, or do you have something more casual and personal in mind?" "Definitely something more casual and personal. I thought we could have a picnic in the palace gardens, where we can talk freely without servants and court officials observing our every interaction." As Arya left the palace that afternoon, she felt cautiously optimistic about her magical engagement to Prince Alexander, and the possibility that their convergence binding might lead to genuine love and partnership rather than just political necessity. Alexander had proven to be thoughtful, considerate, and genuinely interested in building a real relationship with her, qualities that suggested their magical marriage might become much more meaningful than either of them had initially expected. Chapter 3. Over the following month, Alexander proved to be the most creative and romantic person Arya had ever encountered, consistently finding reasons to postpone their official wedding ceremony in favor of elaborate and thoughtful dates that allowed them to explore their compatibility and build genuine affection for each other. Their first picnic in the palace gardens had been followed by increasingly adventurous outings that showcased Alexander's determination to court Arya properly despite their magical obligations. "I've been thinking," Alexander had said during their second week of dating, "that we should probably postpone the wedding ceremony again so we can take a trip to the Starfall Observatory. I know you're interested in celestial magic, and I thought you might enjoy seeing the kingdom's most advanced magical telescopes." Arya had been delighted by Alexander's attention to her interests and his willingness to prioritize their relationship development over the royal court's pressure to formalize their union quickly. The trip to the observatory had been magical in every sense, with Alexander arranging for them to have private access to the powerful telescopes that revealed distant galaxies and mystical phenomena invisible to ordinary sight. "This is incredible," Arya had breathed as she observed a nebula that sparkled with rainbow colors and seemed to pulse with its own magical energy. "I've never seen anything so beautiful." Alexander had smiled at her enthusiasm, clearly pleased by her reaction to his carefully planned surprise. "I'm glad you're enjoying it. I wanted our dates to reflect your actual interests rather than just generic romantic activities that any couple might pursue." Their third date had been an adventure in the Whispering Woods, where Alexander had led Arya to a hidden grove that was said to reveal the true nature of people's magical abilities. They had spent the afternoon practicing spells together and discovering that their magical energies were indeed complementary, creating effects that neither of them could achieve independently. "Watch this," Alexander had said, holding out his hand for Arya to take while he attempted a complex protection spell that required two casters working in perfect harmony. When Arya had joined her magic with his, their combined power had created a shimmering dome of golden light that was far more beautiful and powerful than anything either of them had managed alone. The experience had been both magical and intimate, giving them concrete evidence that their convergence binding was based on genuine magical compatibility rather than just political convenience. "We work really well together," Arya had observed, feeling amazed by the ease with which their magical energies had synchronized and amplified each other. Alexander had squeezed her hand gently, his expression conveying both wonder and growing affection. "I think we work well together in more ways than just magic." By their fourth date, the royal court was beginning to express concern about the repeated postponements of their wedding ceremony, with various advisors and officials suggesting that delays in fulfilling their magical contract might weaken the protective benefits that their union was meant to provide. "His Highness," the court wizard had said during a formal meeting about their wedding timeline, "the convergence binding specifies that the marriage must be completed within one turning of the seasons. We are already approaching the halfway point of that time frame." Alexander had listened patiently to these concerns before responding with the kind of diplomatic skill that proved he was indeed well suited for eventual leadership of the kingdom. "I understand the magical timeline," Alexander had replied calmly, "but I also believe that the strength of our eventual union will be enhanced by taking time to build genuine understanding and affection between Lady Arya and myself. A marriage that is based on real partnership will provide stronger magical protection than one that is purely contractual." Arya had felt impressed by Alexander's ability to advocate for their relationship while also respecting the legitimate concerns about their magical obligations and the kingdom's safety. Perhaps, Arya had suggested during the same meeting, we could plan the wedding ceremony for the end of our binding timeline, which would give us several more months to complete our courtship while still honoring our magical contract within the required time frame. The court wizard had agreed that this approach would satisfy both their personal preferences and their magical obligations, though he had insisted on regular magical monitoring to ensure that their delayed marriage didn't interfere with the protective benefits that their binding was meant to provide. With the pressure from the royal court temporarily resolved, Alexander had continued planning increasingly elaborate and personal dates that allowed them to explore different aspects of their compatibility and shared interests. Their fifth date had been a visit to the Royal Library's restricted magical text section, where Alexander had arranged for them to research the history of convergence bindings and learn more about the magical partnership they were destined to create. "Look at this," Arya had said, discovering an account of her ancestor Lydia Blackthorn's marriage to King Marcus the Bold. "It says that they initially resented their magical binding but gradually fell in love through shared adventures and mutual respect for each other's magical abilities." Alexander had read over her shoulder, his proximity making Arya increasingly aware of her growing attraction to him that went far beyond their magical compatibility. "That gives me hope for our own relationship," Alexander had murmured, his breath warm against her ear in a way that made Arya's heart race with more than just academic excitement. Their sixth date had been the most romantic yet, involving a midnight sailing expedition to a mystical island where rare magical flowers bloomed only under starlight. Alexander had packed an elaborate picnic dinner and arranged for them to have complete privacy to enjoy the magical beauty of the island and each other's company. "I have a confession to make," Alexander had said as they sat together on the beach, watching the magical flowers glow with ethereal light while waves lapped gently at the shore. Arya had felt her heart skip, wondering what Alexander was about to reveal and hoping it would be something that deepened their connection rather than complicating their relationship. "What kind of confession?" she had asked, turning to face him fully in the starlight that made his features appear even more handsome than usual. Alexander had taken her hands in his expression serious but warm. "I'm falling in love with you, and it has nothing to do with our magical binding or royal duty. I would want to be with you even if we had met under completely ordinary circumstances." Arya had felt a surge of joy and relief at Alexander's declaration, recognizing that her own feelings had been developing in the same direction despite her initial resistance to their magical engagement. "I'm falling in love with you too," she had replied honestly, "and I'm grateful that our convergence binding gave us the opportunity to discover that we're genuinely compatible as people, not just as magical partners." Alexander had kissed her then, softly and sweetly under the starlight, and Arya had realized that their magical marriage was going to be much more wonderful than she had ever dared to hope when she first discovered the golden mark on her wrist. As they sailed back to the mainland that night, both of them glowing with happiness and newfound love, Arya reflected on how dramatically her perspective on their magical binding had changed through Alexander's patient and thoughtful courtship. "Thank you for insisting that we take time to actually get to know each other," Arya told Alexander as they stood together at the bow of their boat, watching the palace lights grow larger as they approached the harbor. Alexander wrapped his arms around her from behind, holding her close as they enjoyed the peaceful conclusion to their most romantic date yet. "Thank you for being open to the possibility that our magical contract could lead to real love," Alexander replied, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "I think we're going to have a very happy marriage, magical binding or no magical binding." Chapter 4, The Royal Court's Impatience. By their third month of courtship, Alexander and Arya had fallen deeply in love, and were genuinely excited about their upcoming wedding. But the royal court's patience with their extended dating period was beginning to wear thin. Reports of dark magic activity in neighboring kingdoms were increasing, and the court wizard was expressing growing concern that their delayed marriage might be weakening the kingdom's magical defenses at a critical time. "Your Highness," Lord Chancellor Blackwood said during a formal court session where Alexander was required to provide updates on various royal matters, "while we appreciate your desire to build a strong personal relationship with Lady Arya, the kingdom's safety must take precedence over romantic considerations. The dark forces gathering in Shadowmere grow stronger each day, and our magical defenses require the full power of your convergence binding to maintain their effectiveness." Alexander listened patiently to these concerns, but Arya could see that he was frustrated by the court's inability to understand that their genuine love for each other would make their magical partnership more powerful rather than less effective. "Lord Chancellor," Alexander replied with diplomatic courtesy, "I believe that the strength of our eventual magical union will be significantly enhanced by the genuine affection and understanding that Lady Arya and I have developed through our courtship. A marriage based on real partnership and mutual respect will provide stronger protection for the kingdom than one that is purely contractual." The court wizard stepped forward with a collection of magical readings and calculations that he had been monitoring throughout Alexander and Arya's courtship period. "Your Highness speaks of genuine affection," the court wizard said, "but our magical instruments indicate that the power of your convergence binding has actually been increasing throughout your courtship rather than diminishing due to the delayed marriage ceremony. This suggests that your emotional connection is indeed strengthening your magical compatibility." Arya felt relieved and vindicated by this confirmation that their approach to their relationship had been beneficial rather than problematic for their magical obligations and the kingdom's safety. "If our magical bond is growing stronger through our courtship," Arya said, addressing the assembled court officials directly, "then surely it makes sense to continue building our relationship until we reach the optimal moment for our wedding ceremony." Lord Chancellor Blackwood looked skeptical about this reasoning. "Lady Arya, while the magical readings are encouraging, we must also consider the political implications of your extended engagement. Other kingdoms are beginning to question whether the royal family is serious about honoring magical contracts and maintaining the traditional alliances that have kept our realm secure." Ayaan felt his patience with court politics beginning to fray, particularly when political considerations were being used to pressure him into rushing his marriage to the woman he loved. "With respect, Lord Chancellor," Sandanzalar Winamino Saris says, but becoming firmer, "the political opinions of other kingdoms should not dictate the timing of my personal relationship with my future wife. Our marriage will be stronger and more beneficial to the kingdom if it is based on genuine love and partnership rather than expedited for political convenience." The tension in the throne room was becoming apparent to everyone present, with court officials clearly divided between those who supported Alexander's approach to his relationship and those who believed that royal duty should override personal preferences even in matters of love and marriage.
Queen Isabella, Alexander's mother, chose this moment to enter the discussion with her own perspective on the situation. "Perhaps," the Queen said with the kind of diplomatic wisdom that had made her an effective royal consort for over 20 years, "we could find a compromise that honors both the prince's desire for a meaningful courtship and the court's concerns about our magical obligations and political stability." Alexander looked at his mother with interest and gratitude, recognizing that her support could help resolve the growing tension between his personal relationship goals and his royal responsibilities. "What kind of compromise did you have in mind, Mother?" Alexander asked. Queen Isabella smiled at her son with obvious affection and pride in his dedication to building a strong marriage with Arya. "We could announce a definitive wedding date that falls within the acceptable time frame for your magical binding, which would address the court's political concerns while still giving you additional time to continue your courtship. We could also begin planning the ceremony itself, which would demonstrate our commitment to honoring the convergence contract." Arya felt that this suggestion offered an excellent balance between their desire for continued relationship development and the legitimate concerns about their magical and political obligations. "I think that's a wonderful compromise," Arya said, looking at Alexander to gauge his reaction to his mother's proposal. Alexander nodded with obvious relief and appreciation for his mother's diplomatic solution to their complicated situation. "That sounds perfect," Alexander agreed. "We could set the wedding date for 2 months from now, which would give us time to complete our courtship properly, while also allowing sufficient time for wedding planning and preparation." The court wizard consulted his magical calculations and confirmed that this timeline would satisfy their convergence binding requirements, while also providing optimal magical protection for the kingdom during the anticipated period of increased dark magic activity. 2 months will be sufficient for both magical and political purposes, the court wizard confirmed, and the additional courtship time will likely continue to strengthen their magical compatibility, which will enhance the protective benefits of their union. With the wedding date officially established, Alexander felt free to continue planning romantic adventures and meaningful experiences that would deepen his relationship with Arya, while also preparing both of them for their future roles as magical partners and eventual rulers of the kingdom. Now that we have a definite wedding date, Alexander told Arya privately after the court session concluded, we can focus on enjoying our remaining courtship time without worrying about political pressure or magical deadlines. Arya felt excited about their upcoming marriage and grateful for the additional time they would have to continue building their relationship before taking on the full responsibilities of their magical partnership. I'm looking forward to planning our wedding together, Arya replied, taking Alexander's hand as they walked through the palace gardens. But I'm also excited about continuing our dates and adventures over the next 2 months. Alexander squeezed her hand affectionately. I have so many more places I want to show you and experiences I want to share with you before we become officially married. Our courtship has been the happiest period of my life, and I want to make sure we have as many wonderful memories as possible. As they planned their remaining courtship activities and began discussing their preferences for their wedding ceremony, both Alexander and Arya felt confident that their magical binding had led to exactly the kind of love and partnership that would benefit not only their own happiness, but also the safety and prosperity of their entire kingdom. Their convergence curse had indeed turned out to be the greatest blessing either of them could have imagined, proving that sometimes destiny knew better than individual choice when it came to matters of love and magical compatibility. Chapter 5. The Perfect Wedding. The 2 months leading up to their wedding proved to be the most magical and romantic period of Alexander and Arya's courtship, with the prince continuing to prioritize creative dates and meaningful shared experiences even as they planned their elaborate royal ceremony. Alexander seemed determined to make every remaining day of their engagement special and memorable, as if he wanted to ensure that their love story would be legendary, even by the standards of magical royal romances. Their 7th date took them to the crystal caves beneath the Mystic Mountains, where they explored underground chambers filled with naturally occurring magical crystals that sang in harmony when exposed to true love. The caves had responded to their presence with the most beautiful music either of them had ever heard, confirming that their emotional bond was genuine and powerful enough to activate ancient magical phenomena. Listen to that, Arya had whispered as they stood together in a cathedral-sized chamber where thousands of crystals created symphonic melodies that seemed to celebrate their love. Alexander had pulled her closer, marveling at the way the crystal songs became more complex and beautiful when they were physically connected. It's like the magic of this place recognizes what we have together, Alexander had replied, spinning Arya in an impromptu dance to the crystal music that surrounded them. Their 8th date had been a visit to the Oracle of the Sacred Grove, an ancient mystical being who could reveal glimpses of possible futures for those brave enough to seek her wisdom. Alexander had arranged the consultation as a way for them to understand what their married life might hold and whether their magical partnership would indeed provide the protection their kingdom needed. Prince Alexander and Lady Arya, the oracle had intoned in her otherworldly voice, your union shall be blessed with great love, powerful magic, and the strength to overcome any darkness that threatens your realm. Your children will inherit both your magical gifts and your capacity for true partnership. Arya had felt tears of joy at this prophecy, especially the mention of children who would carry on their magical bloodline and their love for each other. Did she say children? Arya had whispered to Alexander as they left the sacred grove. Alexander had nodded with a smile that conveyed both excitement and tender emotion. I hope you're as happy about that prospect as I am. Their 9th date had been the most adventurous yet, involving a quest to retrieve a legendary magical artifact that could serve as the centerpiece for their wedding ceremony. The Heartstone of Eternal Union was said to be hidden in the Labyrinth of Mirrors, a mystical maze that could only be navigated by couples whose love was strong enough to overcome illusions and fears. Working together to solve the labyrinth's puzzles and overcome its magical challenges had tested not only their individual magical abilities, but also their trust in each other and their communication skills. When they finally reached the center of the maze and claimed the Heartstone, its brilliant light had confirmed that they were indeed destined to be eternal partners. We did it, Alexander had said as the Heartstone responded to their touch with warm, pulsing light that seemed to echo their synchronized heartbeats. Arya had marveled at the beautiful gem that would now become part of their wedding ceremony, but she was even more amazed by how effectively she and Alexander had worked together to overcome the labyrinth's challenges. We make a really good team, Arya had observed, feeling confident about their ability to face whatever challenges their future might hold. Their 10th and final date before the wedding had been a quiet, intimate evening in Alexander's private chambers, where they had talked for hours about their hopes and dreams for their marriage and their future roles as magical protectors of the kingdom. I want you to know, Alexander had said as they sat together by the fireplace, that even though our relationship began with a magical binding, everything I feel for you now is completely genuine and freely chosen. I would marry you tomorrow even if there were no curse, no magical contract, and no royal obligations involved. Arya had felt overwhelmed with love and gratitude for Alexander's honesty and the depth of feeling he expressed so openly. "I feel exactly the same way," Arya had replied, taking his hands in hers and looking directly into his eyes. "Our convergence binding brought us together, but our choice to love each other is what will make our marriage truly magical." Alexander had proposed to her properly that evening, not because of their magical contract, but because he wanted to express his personal choice to spend his life with her. The ring he presented was a family heirloom that had belonged to his grandmother, a woman who had also married for love despite royal pressure to make a political alliance. "Will you marry me because you want to?" Alexander had asked, "not because you have to?" Arya's yes had been immediate and heartfelt, accompanied by tears of joy and the absolute certainty that she was making the best decision of her life. The wedding ceremony itself was the most magnificent celebration the kingdom had seen in generations, combining royal pageantry with genuine magical power and the obvious love between the bride and groom. The Heartstone of Eternal Union served as the focal point for their magical binding, creating a protective aura around the kingdom that could be felt by every citizen as a warm, comforting presence. By the power of the convergence binding and the strength of true love, the court wizard pronounced as Alexander and Arya joined hands around the glowing Heartstone, "I pronounce you husband and wife, magical partners for life, and protectors of this realm." When Alexander kissed Arya at the conclusion of their ceremony, the magical energy released by their union created a spectacular display of golden light that filled the cathedral and spilled out across the kingdom, officially activating their convergence binding and establishing the magical protection that would keep their realm safe from dark forces. "I love you, Princess Arya," Alexander whispered against her lips as their first kiss as husband and wife concluded. "I love you too, my prince," Arya replied, feeling amazed by how perfectly their magical contract had led to genuine love and the happiest ending she could have imagined. As they walked down the cathedral aisle as husband and wife, surrounded by cheering crowds and glowing with magical energy, both Alexander and Arya felt grateful for the convergence curse that had brought them together and the courtship period that had allowed them to build a real relationship based on love, respect, and genuine compatibility. Their marriage would indeed provide powerful protection for the kingdom, but more importantly, it had given them the greatest love story either of them could have dreamed of, proving that sometimes magical destiny and personal choice could align to create the most beautiful possible outcome. Years later, when they told their children the story of how they met and fell in love, Alexander and Arya would always emphasize that the most magical part of their relationship wasn't the convergence binding that brought them together, but their decision to choose each other every day and build a partnership based on love, laughter, and endless adventures that were even more wonderful than their legendary courtship dates. Their curse had indeed become their greatest blessing, creating not just a magical alliance but a love story for the ages that